You're listening to Releasing Trauma, a survivor's podcast. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. All right. In this episode, y'all, we are going to be talking about step-parenting. And I know as soon as you hear the word step-parent, most of us cringe because we have stories, but it doesn't always have to be bad. There's so many amazing step-parents in the world. And so, yeah, it's not always a bad thing. And with me today is Maria Natapov, and we are going to talk about trauma and step-parenting. So Maria, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to speak with you, Tracy.
I am thrilled to have you. And, for me, it wasn't always the whole cringe about the step parents. But growing up, I did not get along with my stepmom at all. And then as I, became an adult in my probably mid 20s to early 40s, we got along fine. And then she moved in with me. She'd had a stroke and was, she's basically paralyzed and wheelchair bound and stuff. And so, we flew her out to Georgia and had her move in with us. And, I was reminded very quickly why we didn't get along as a teenager. And after about 3.5 years or so, I actually had to get her out of my home. It had just become so toxic between me and her and between her and my children. And it's unfortunate. It really is, because she'd been in my life since I was 7. So it's not like, not like she was new to my world or anything. And unfortunately, I think there's too many of those stories out there where the stepmom or stepdad comes in and they're just, especially the stepmom, is automatically perceived as evil and wicked.
Yeah.
So do we get that from Disney? I mean, is it coming from the fairy tales?
That's a great question. I was actually thinking about that myself recently. I think you're totally right. A lot of it is the media and folklore even, right? So dating even back further.
Yeah.
And I think it's also a really challenging thing to navigate, because I think that oftentimes we underestimate just how much goes into really successfully setting up, oneself in that role. Right? Because there's so many stakeholders all at once. And so not only is there the responsibility of this kind of new role in general and everything that comes along with an individual's emotional journey of navigating that and kind of adjusting to that, but now children, obviously, right? Like a huge priority. And that can be really challenging. And oftentimes, let's face it, they're not coming into the situation with a wonderful background, right? Like usually it's like divorce or God forbid they lost a parent. So lots of, already kind of turmoil and lots of challenges, lots of extremely devastating emotional stuff to unpack there. And then of course, kind of the same for their partner, right? Like still some stuff usually that has been challenging and painful, if not still continues to be painful, right? In the case of divorce, for example, that can be a multi-year process to navigate. And so who knows kind of where that is happening on the journey, the recoupling with this new partner. And then on top of that, the extended family, still creating space for the ex-partner in many cases to be around and be present with the kids. And it's just not a picnic by any means. So, yeah. And I think it's really, like I said, just lots of nuances that go into considering each of those pieces and setting oneself up for success in those areas. It takes a lot, and it can often be extremely overwhelming to go that journey alone.
So, I guess let's start with how do we enter into those relationships as the adults and setting the relationship up for success with the kids?
Yes. And which are we going to tackle first? Is this for the incoming step parent, or is this for the parent who is kind of bringing the step parent into this situation?
Well, I would say almost it almost has to be them together, So, for example, me with my fiance, we have to come together and say, of course, my kids are basically grown up, but, you have to come together and say, okay, how can we set this up for success with both of us parenting these children or,
Yeah. So 100%, I agree with you. It has to be together. But I do think it's important to recognize, for example, for the incoming step parent, what are their goals, right? What are they comfortable with taking on right away? And understanding that this role can grow over time. It doesn't all have to be how it's going to be forever. But what feels comfortable now, right? What is a good starting point? And what are their boundaries? And what are their kind of priorities and values? And I think that's important to actually have happen on both sides. So for the step parent, but also for the partner who is having a step parent join the family. And then they need to, once they're clear on that individually, they need to have a conversation to get on the same page with some of that, right? Because they might not be seeing completely eye to eye, and that's fine. And that can be worked through as long as everybody, feels clear and feels safe to have the conversation and be heard, and to feel comfortable that they don't have to have all the answers on one conversation. It might take several.
Oh, yeah.
To really get there. But it's like, but we're starting to get curious. We're starting to plant the seeds, and we're having the discussion, which opens up possibilities, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's a really important first step. And certainly, I mean, it's definitely going to be more challenging if anybody is like bad mouthing the other parent, right? Or
oh yeah.
Yeah. Or, I mean, basically putting kids into a loyalty bind, which is, kids are always going to want and to hold out hope, or sometimes even subconsciously, no matter what age, truthfully, they're going to want their parents together, and they're going to want access to both of their parents because they're physiologically hardwired for that.
Right.
So with that understanding, just creating space and for this new person, the step parent coming in, recognizing they're not trying to be a parent. It doesn't mean that they won't take on some responsibilities. And again, it doesn't mean that they can't take on more as time goes on and they build strong relationships with the children and start to get a feel and, and kind of meld into the systems and structures, et cetera. But it's important to recognize that, because I think sometimes people come into these situations and too quickly just trying to jump right in and kind of fill what they perceive to be their obligations. And actually that causes a lot more tension, both for the step parent, it's overwhelming and just way too much. And for kids, they're resistant to it because they're not used to it. And it feels also way too much. So for adults, when they're in a relationship, they're adults, so they know how to do it. They usually, they've learned some lessons as to what they want, what they don't want, and they feel so excited because they're in love and they want to move right along. But there is this really important consideration of these children and what their experience is, and oftentimes they need things to move at a much slower pace.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So that's a way to make things much easier for everybody involved. And in a way, it could be really comforting to have that pressure alleviated from the step parent, to know like, oh yeah, that's fine. I can move things slowly. And that's a good thing.
Right. And you really touched on a big point, and that is the bad mouthing. Mm-hmm. And that happens so often. I'm thinking back to my past, and I'm sure I've been guilty of it. I tried not to. I try to make sure I never said bad things about my kids' dads in front of them, but we're human, and I'm sure I've made comments. But I know that, like with my oldest daughter, with her dad and stepmom, I encouraged it. I encouraged her to have a good relationship with her stepmom. She and I didn't get along very well, but that's fine. She was good for my ex-husband and she was good for my daughter. And that's really all that mattered.
That's amazing that you were able to recognize that. Exactly. Like, you don't need to, live under the same roof with this person.
Right. We don't have to be besties.
Right. Like, it's really about stability to the degree, of making life easier for yourself as well as, right, the family, to the degree possible, right? Wherever that's possible. Because realistically, sometimes it's just not possible. And that's a reality. And we can't, we have to see that for what it is also. That's important. But that's amazing that you were able to recognize that it would be best. You were able to recognize she had good qualities to offer your daughter and your children, and that it would be best if you removed that, that conflict for your children about, like I said, that loyalty bind, which is, well, if I like this new parent, that means that I no longer love my mom, or somehow I'm betraying, mom, or it could be dad. It doesn't matter which parent it is. Yeah. Right. That's huge, because that does make it so much easier for them to transition and be able to accept and kind of move forward with this new life, this new reality.
When it comes to our kids, we have to put our pettiness and our hurt feelings and, whatever else we have aside. Yeah. Because in the end, when we're bad mouthing the step parent, or, purposely trying to create that angst and animosity in the relationship, all we're doing is hurting our kids.
Right. But I think it is important to recognize, divorce is devastating.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Been there a few times.
Wrenching, right? Like, nobody ever gets married thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to get divorced. Like, that's not in the plan. Right. And there's so much mourning of, the relationship, the love that you once had, the life that you, were building or had hoped for, what have you, right? It's so devastating on so many levels. Financially, everything else as well, right?
Exactly.
And so giving yourself grace and space to process it, like you said, ideally not in front of your children, ideally not with them, although it is important to kind of model a little bit and invite some of those conversations with your children to, in a way that is encouraging them to process emotions and to kind of name, hey, this is hard, right? And here's what maybe I don't so much like about the situation, or here's what feels upsetting, or here's what's making me angry, or what have you. Because that just helps them to process their emotions and not leave them stuck or feeling like, well, no, we just have to pretend everything is peachy keen, because that's just not realistic. And also giving, like I said, for the adults, taking the space and the time and getting support if necessary to really do a ton of self-care, because it sucks and it's painful, and it's important to give yourself that time to fully feel your feelings and mourn and process and, cry if you need to, but also build in some good habits that support you, that help you to feel good. So maybe for somebody that's exercising, maybe it's a walk, maybe it's, I don't know, going swimming at the local pool, or, reading a book or listening to music, whatever it is. Maybe it's dancing your heart out, whatever that is for you, because, those will be your supports that will help you through this process. And it's going to be a long journey.
Yeah, absolutely. You see these scenarios where the parent and the step parents and the other parents, and they're, a cohesive little unit, and they all come together and co-parent quite nicely. And that is the ideal. It really is. But it doesn't happen overnight.
No, not at all. And in fact, I was actually recently speaking to Dr. Patricia Papernow, who's an expert. She's the world's leading expert on step family dynamics. She's been studying it for 4 decades. She's a psychologist. She's done research in this area. And she said in the best case of scenarios, it's a several-year process because there's just so many nuances. The other thing that probably feels really natural, when I'm going to name it in a moment, but we might not always think of right away. So when people are recoupling and they are turning to their partner, if it's the parent, the child, if they're there, feels alone. They feel isolated. They feel like the parent turned away from them. And vice versa, if they're turning their attention to the child, the step parent, their new partner, feels like their partner's turning away from them. So they're feeling left out. And that's just the way that goes in the beginning because they're the common denominator. And for the actual parent who's, recoupling, they might not realize it. It might be confusing to them because to them, well, they have a great bond with the child, of course, and they certainly do with the partner also. So they might just not be aware that this is the experience for people that they really care about. And that can be challenging for them as well. So just knowing, having the map of understanding that this is the case can often help, and understanding it is difficult and it does take time. And, she also mentioned, the idea of blending. That's sort of an ideal that we strive for, but very often it doesn't happen. It can, but very often it doesn't. It's an approximation, right? It's something we strive for, but oftentimes, it's just too difficult. And depending on the ages of the children, when, the step family, comes together and the different circumstances, it might not be a possibility. And that's okay as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk a little bit about parenting the children and discipline and that kind of thing, because that can be such a sticky situation. Kid does something wrong and the step parent tries to get onto them or whatever. And then all of a sudden the parent jumps in and is like, no, and protects the kid, or it's the case of, you can't discipline my child at all because you're the step parent, or, so it's, well, just wait till your dad gets home. I'm going to tell your dad when he gets home and he's going to deal with you. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. You've really nailed it. I think that is one of the stickiest, most difficult things. And it can often be one of the most toxic components to the whole dynamic, right? And a huge obstacle to building the connection between the step parent and the children. So I think, again, the biggest piece is to as a rule of thumb, a great default is to leave the disciplining to the parent, because then it just removes, those questions. It removes that, well, who are you? And you're not my parent and I don't have to listen to you. It just removes all of that from the equation. But certainly speaking to your partner about, what makes sense and having those conversations. And once totally away from the children, I strongly advise until you get to a place where you guys have some agreement and some clarity. And once you do have that clarity, having the conversation with the children, I think oftentimes children are left out of the equation because we just assume, well, they don't know. But so much more often, even when they're quite young, they have feelings and they are little humans, with their own personality, and they can be quite good at identifying and communicating what they need and how they're feeling, and involving them in those conversations, allowing them to be heard, showing them that their feelings and opinions are valued, and coming up with solutions collaboratively, like family meetings are a really wonderful way to have some of these things and discuss some of these things. Maybe everybody brings an issue. Sometimes if people have trouble, taking turns, you could use a talking stick. That's always a really good solution. And just sort of opening up the floor, right, to exploring some of these things and making it comfortable and making everybody feel heard and seen, which is usually the biggest way to build connection and often the most important need that we all have.
Yeah. I agree. I like that. You definitely create those guidelines and boundaries. Because obviously the step parent, they have to have some authority. The parent is gone at work or they're out of town on a trip or whatever it is, the step parent has to have some authority over, dealing with the kids. Because let's face it, kids aren't perfect. And they're going to do things and they're going to get in trouble. And the step parent has to be able to jump in certain circumstances,
Absolutely. But like you said, building that little by little and extending that time. So it's not like, well, we just met and you're going to stay with so-and-so. Well, that's very new.
Right.
I'm comfortable with that. And it's just kind of a recipe for disaster. So maybe alternate arrangements need to be made for something like that. But certainly, great opportunities to practice it little by little as, the step parent is with the children for maybe a few hours or maybe a whole afternoon or a whole evening or maybe like half a day or even longer, and just sort of testing it out, seeing how it went, discussing, and reevaluating, right, constantly and reassessing how it's going and what the needs are and what are the challenges. And again, just readdressing that with the kids as well. And in addition to talking about it as a whole unit, it is really beneficial to also have individual conversations like the step parent and the child or the children, as well as the parent and the children too, because sometimes in confidence or one-on-one, you get a little bit more or something different than you might not get in the group, right? Or, however the conversation goes. So those are also really valuable things. And I actually can't stress enough the importance for the step parent to take advantage of, one-on-one time with the kids, because how else do you build connection? Right. And in a group, it's one thing. And certainly that's great, but it's too easy to kind of default to the parent because they're the
parent.
They're the safety and they're used to kind of that dynamic of, whatever, I can just lean on this person. I've known this person forever. They get me. They can pretty much read my mind. Whereas when they actually show up individually to this new relationship, really wonderful things could happen, right? But it doesn't happen without those opportunities and kind of taking that initiative and creating that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's just a matter of time and communication.
Exactly. Yeah,
for sure.
And it's these simple things like do something around the house together. Kids love to be helpful, especially little kids. They love to be helpful. They feel so important, contributing to something really necessary. So take advantage of that and, just chit chat.
Yep. Cook together, clean together, go play out in the yard, rake leaves and jump in them, whatever it is. Yeah. Fold laundry.
Right. Remember like their favorite activity. Like if they absolutely love to go rollerblading, like go ahead and create some time to give that a go, like even if it's not your cup of tea, but and also remembering there has to be some give and take, right? So it can't just be, well, I'm the parent, you have to do the thing that I want to do, or I'm the adult. Like it's gotta be, you got to come into it a little bit more on the same playing field with the understanding that, okay, this is new for both of us. we're gonna build together. I think respect is a really key piece. Often, especially for children, really showing them respect goes so far, right? I mean, who would ever respond to being disrespected in a positive manner, right?
Exactly.
Like in a work situation, right? Like it would just never fly. You would be complaining, you'd be crying, you would quit, or you would be finding another job, or what happened,
Exactly.
filing a lawsuit, right? Like, who knows? But oftentimes it doesn't go over well. And this is no different, right?
Yeah. And, it's funny that you went there because that's exactly where I was about to go. Because it's something that I've learned just from my past. And, again, it depends on, the ages and everything that you're dealing with. But, when I was growing up, it was children need to respect their elders, no matter what.
Yeah.
Well, with my kids, it was, respect your elders if they show you respect.
Right.
You don't have to respect somebody who shows you absolute disrespect. And so, I was thinking along the same lines as that definitely you have to show the kids respect. And something that I would run into with like my stepmom and my kids, or my late husband and my kids, or whatever it was, is, well, they don't respect me. Well, you're not showing them respect, and it was coming from both sides. It's like, okay, well, one of you has to start showing some kind of respect, and, well, it's not going to be me because they're disrespecting me. Well, it's not going to be me because they're disrespecting me. And I'm like, well, somebody has to be a grown up here. Which one of you is going to be the grown up? Is it going to be the grown up or the kids? Somebody's got to give. And that's where there was so much headbutting, is because nobody would give.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you pointed that out, because ideally, right, it would be the adult, because they're the adult. Because they're the ones, first of all, adults have a lot more tools usually and experience with being able to right? Like, kids just don't have that frame of reference because they've had less years on this earth. And they've just had less experience, right?
Right.
So, and on top of it, it's a wonderful way to kind of model, right? I mean, kids so often reflect back to us what we're seeing, or rather what we're doing, even if we're not able to see that in the moment. Usually that's what we can always trace it back to. So if we want them to show a certain, or demonstrate a certain behavior, we need to be the ones to start that ball rolling, so that they can feel like, okay, I like the way this feels. I'll model it. Because oftentimes that's exactly what's going on. And the more we dig our heels in, the more they're going to do the same. And it just makes things, like you pointed out, just adds to the tension.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And it's hard. I know it's hard, because you get to that point where you're like, okay, I'm going to try and, change the way I talk with them, change the way I interact with them. But the kids are still reflecting the other behaviors, and so then it's easy to just give up. Well, I tried. You tried for 5 minutes, it's not going to happen overnight. You just have to keep working at it.
100%. I mean, my step parenting journey, I've been a step parent for almost 10 years. And I'm not too proud to admit. I mean, certainly there are times that I didn't do things the best way. I had the best of intentions, but I certainly, I had a temper, and, I very much grew up the way that you were saying, like, respect your elders, and there's absolutely no talking back, and you just do whatever you're told. And
exactly.
Because I had the best of intentions, but with, getting upset, I wouldn't always communicate that in the most calm and loving manner. There's a lot of tension, and there's a lot of resistance naturally. And I remember at one point my fiance and I were talking about this, and he said to me a really great analogy, which is, well, think about it this way. If you're poking somebody, right, and you just keep poking them, you're going to think, well, it's negligible, it's not a big deal. But then if it happens over the course of a week relentlessly, I mean, that's going to make you bleed, right? Like that, you might even have flesh at this point. And then if you keep that going for 3 months, I mean, you probably would be breaking bone, right? With a simple poke, because it's a cumulative effect. And so therefore, when we're undoing some of that, as we evolve and as we grow and as we realize certain things and learn new skills, it's, keeping in mind, like you said, that you're not going to fix it in 5 minutes, because you're also sort of undoing some of that. And now you're recreating a new thing. And you can do that. And it's such a wonderful thing to do. And it's such a beautiful gift to give to your stepchildren, yourself, your family, right? I mean, everything blossoms from those evolutions and transformations, but with the understanding that it's going to take some time, and that's okay. And don't take it personally. And, give yourself a pat on the back for recognizing it, for taking a new approach. Just understand it's going to take some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Maria, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us today. This is such an important topic. It really is.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure. Listeners, as you know, I will have all of Maria's information in the show notes, the link to her website and everything. So definitely, if you are in this area of either being a step parent or, being the parent and having a spouse who's the step parent, definitely reach out to her and get some support. So just head over to releasingtraumapodcast.com, pull up Maria's episode, and everything will be there for you. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening from one of your favorite podcast app, make sure you smash all those buttons and give us a like and a follow and a subscribe and whatever else you can do. And we'll talk to you in the next show. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a show. Be sure to check us out on our new socials on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.